Hello and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories near and far. I'm Chamberlain Oso at Channels Television here in Abuja. I'm joined by my colleague Vincent McCurry from Voice of America in Washington.
Well, thanks. I'm Vincent McCurry at the Voice of America. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Chamberlain Oso in Abuja brings you that story.
The Manufacturers Association of Nigeria has set up a 10-year agenda to create a strong institutional and regulatory framework to address the major challenges of industrialization in the country. Well, this was the main focus of a lecture delivered at the second Adeola Odutola lecture in commemoration of the 50th annual general meeting of the association in Lagos, Nigeria's commercial capital.
God bless Nigeria.
The second in the series of the Adeola Odutola lecture attracts captains of industry, small and large-scale industrialists, all members of the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, as well as policymakers.
The lecture of our special guest.
It is a platform for contemporary discourse on industrialization, as the organizer continues to engage stakeholders to achieve desired performance of the manufacturing sector.
The association had always had to deal with the various challenges in an economy that over the years has seen many challenges, many ups and downs. It is in this regard that at this annual meeting we felt that the association, its members and its guests should pause and look at where we have been and think of the future.
Guest lecturer Alhaji Aliko Dangote takes on the subject matter, analyzing the current status of the manufacturing sector and constraints to its optimal performance.
Nigeria's industrialization process has been greatly challenged by structural and institutional constraints, particularly funding. These factors have over the years cumulatively contributed to its disappointing performance. For instance, in the last decade, average share of manufacturing value added to GDP in countries like China and Malaysia stood at 41% and 38% respectively, compared to 14% in Nigeria.
Setting the agenda for industrialization in Nigeria in the next decade, Alhaji Dangote identifies measures that need to be put in place to accelerate the growth of the manufacturing sector.
To drive industrialization and sustained economic growth in Nigeria, it is important that deliberate policies that are manufacturing specific should be designed to support manufacturing activities and address the perennial challenges of the sector.
One of the highlights of the event is the unveiling of a Blueprint 2.0, a document to accelerate development of manufacturing in Nigeria. The organizers expect that key recommendations from the lecture will form the basis for the implementation of business-enabling policies that will drive industrialization and economic growth.
Well, joining us to discuss this is a developmental economist, Kola Ogunleye. Glad to have you join us on Africa 54.
Thank you very much, Chamberlain.
Yeah, so thank you. Now, the manufacturing sector has been faced with several structural and institutional challenges, particularly when it has to do with funding. How do you think this can be addressed?
Recently, there was an effort by the Central Bank and the Bankers Committee to do what they call $200 billion investment in that sector, funding for that sector, which is to be managed by various commercial banks. But the most important thing that needs to happen right now is that even the SMEs' access to credit should be improved upon, because these are the feeders of the major manufacturers. Government must be bold enough to say, this is manufacturing fund, and then there will be other things around it to make it work between the banks, the central banks, and the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, for instance. But a special purpose fund must be created for manufacturing going forward if we are to attain the objective of the 10-year agenda for industrialization.
You know, speaking about action plan, a blueprint was unveiled at the 50th AGM of the association, and it came with a 10-year plan to accelerate growth. How feasible do you think this is?
Well, 10-year action plan, I think is feasible. When you look at some of the things, issues raised by the doyen of manufacturing in Nigeria, talking about Alhaji Aliko Dangote, if you look at some of the, and that's one thing about the private sector. You can see them coming up with figures. They want to jump manufacturing as a contribution to GDP to 20%. They want to move from the current position by 10% in terms of their production capacity and all of that. I think if you look at these statistics and these figures, they are achievable. But being achievable means that, you know, the public sector must do its own part to ensure that our manufacturing sector is supported. For example, the current tax regime and a whole range of taxes that are being pushed into the manufacturing sector must be eased. We really want to generate revenue, but we must also look at it vis-a-vis the capacity of these manufacturers to be able to do their own contribution. For example, in countries like Indonesia and other manufacturing sensitive countries, they have reduced taxes on manufacturing to as low as 20%. Why can't we do that here? So if we're able to do things like that, and if we're able to improve the environment of doing business in this country, if we're able to do that on a very serious note, we'll get there. You really need to look into the details of what is contained there. We have to make them competitive as well. We have to also link the SMEs to the big manufacturers. All these things have to be done for you to say that you are interested in an industrial revolution. And of course, the funding thing that I spoke about, to assist them, because that sector is so key to the future of the economic growth of this country. And in another 10 years, we are talking about 2033. 2030 will have come to the end of SDG. 3 years later, Nigeria should have become a behemoth of manufacturing, not only in Africa, but in the Asia subcontinent as well. Because if you look at what we need to do now to get to where we are going, even in the country, if you do not diversify away from this monoproduct economy, and where you can diversify to is manufacturing, even your agriculture itself must be made to support, to be in tandem with manufacturing. We have something that is taking place in Ogun State today, whereby we have an cargo airport, an agri industrial complex, and all of that. How would that happen if you don't have this support for it? If they have the agricultural products and it's not being converted into manufactures, then you continue to export raw materials. There is no value chain gain at all. So what we need to do to ensure that the 10-year plan becomes a reality is to make sure that the supporting environment, which is supposed to come from government, the public sector is supposed to be a facilitator, a regulator, but it's not, it should not over-regulate.
Certain very interesting points you raised there, but there are certain determinants to economic growth if we need to get to some of these areas and achieve those targets that you've highlighted. For instance, trade openness, financial liberalization, exchange rate, the human capital, good governance, and the likes. Now, do you see manufacturing industries in this country meeting up with some of these?
Yeah, like I said, if you look at the issues that you have referred to, talking about financial liberalization, talking about exchange rates, talking about trade openness. These are the functions of a solid public sector. How do you open trade? You have to diversify. You have to go into exports. You have to remove all the bottlenecks that prevent exportation from taking place seamlessly. You have to ensure that there are very, very limited controls everywhere. You have to liberalize all those situations. And that's when you are talking about trade openness. To open your economy up is a major duty of the government. So when all those things are in place, that is when the manufacturers themselves can begin to take advantage of the policy initiative. And that's just the way it can happen. Financial liberalization must happen, trade openness must happen, and the business environment itself must be supportive of the private sector.
All right. We must thank you very much indeed for your time and perspectives here today, Mr. Kola Ogunlaye, development economist.
Thank you very much.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. And check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. After the break, a new malaria vaccine proves to be 80% effective in trials. Experts say it could save millions of lives and eventually eradicate the disease. Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Now, trials of a new malaria vaccine developed by Britain's University of Oxford show it is 80% effective, meaning it has the potential to save millions of lives and eventually eradicate the disease. Henry Ridgwell reports from London.
The malaria vaccine, named R21, had already shown encouraging trial results after 3 primary doses. But maintaining that immunity has always been a big challenge.
One of the worries was that this would be short-term protection and only last for a few months. That's definitely not the case with the data we're releasing today. And indeed, 80% efficacy in the second year of follow-up after a booster dose is really very encouraging in that respect.
The latest Phase 2 trial involved 450 children aged between 5 and 17 months around the town of Nanoro in Burkina Faso. The results, published in the Lancet Medical Journal, show the higher strength booster dose was 80% effective in preventing malaria infection. No serious side effects were seen.
This is a parasite we're trying to vaccinate against, not a virus. It's got thousands of genes, complex to design a vaccine. Over 100 have been in clinical trials. And this looks like the best data so far, so we're excited.
The Serum Institute of India, which has produced millions of doses of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine, is producing the R21 malaria vaccine.
We're trying to do something similar with malaria, to produce a low-cost vaccine, a few dollars a dose, and to manufacture that really at scale so we can get 100 million doses or more out there as soon as possible.
Malaria killed an estimated 627,000 people in 2020, the most recent available data. The vast majority were children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa. The World Health Organization approved the first ever malaria vaccine in October last year, called RTSS. But R21 may offer even greater hope.
A vaccine with high efficacy like this should be able to save hundreds of thousands of lives a year and ultimately millions of lives over the next decade or so. And then we'll be looking at a vaccine that could actually eliminate regionally and eradicate globally this terrible disease.
Results from the ongoing Phase 3 trial involving 4,800 children are due later this year, and scientists hope to begin mass production in 2023. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News. London.
An Egyptian school teacher, Ali Al-Said, has turned his gas-powered old model Fiat vehicle into an electric car due to increasing fuel prices in Cairo. Now he charges his car once a week, and the car can travel longer hours without thinking of refueling his tank, although the electric battery cost him nearly 6 times the car's original price. The 51-year-old says it is good investment.
This Egyptian teacher may not be driving the latest Model Y Tesla, but instead is turned his 1985 Fiat 127 gas-powered car into an electric one to save on rising fuel prices and resort to a more environment-friendly mode of transportation. The 51-year-old teacher, Ali Al-Sayed, bought a used Fiat 127 a year and a half ago for only 10,000 Egyptian pounds, but couldn't afford the rising cost of fuel for long. The electric battery cost him nearly 6 times the car's original price, but Sayed believes it was a worthy investment.
I used to fill my car with fuel every 2 days for a certain amount of money. Not a lot in the beginning, but with increasing prices, the price of fuel needed for 2 days has doubled. It was problematic for me because I use it a lot. I love to travel. It was hectic.
وتبقى مستقبلا اقدر اسافر بيها امشي مسافات كبيره 200 و300 كيلو.
Now it only costs him 10 Egyptian pounds to power the car's battery for 100 kilometers. He charges his car once a week. Over the past few years, Egypt has phased out subsidies on most fuel products as part of an IMF-backed economic reform program. In July, Egypt further raised domestic fuel prices by 0.50 Egyptian pounds for 80-octane and 92-octane petrol, adding more pressure on inflation.
As the U.S. military considers China's military strength in the Indo-Pacific region, the U.S. Navy is turning to driverless ships to multiply its forces. VOA's Jessica Stone takes us along for a closer look at this military innovation.
These 4 unmanned ships are among the newest additions to the U.S. Navy. Meet Sea Hunter, Seahawk, Nomad, and Ranger. This summer, the Navy gave VOA special access to photograph them for the first time.
There is no water. There are no toilets. They are only meant to be driven in and out of port by a human for obvious safety reasons.
U.S. Naval Commander Jeremiah Daly, permitted to give VOA an audio-only interview, leads the 1st Division made up of remotely operated ships or drone boats. Daly says these unmanned vessels currently being piloted could one day enable the Navy to better patrol the vast 165 million square kilometers of the Pacific Ocean. Japan, Singapore, South Korea, and China all have programs to develop driverless ships. Former top Pentagon Asia official Randy Shriver says drone boats are critical to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific in the face of an expanding and assertive Chinese military.
The spaces that are contested are certainly growing, and I think autonomous or unmanned vehicles, either submerged or on the surface, are cheaper. They're more expendable in terms of not risking the lives of sailors.
James Sebens, a defense strategy fellow at the Stimson Center, worries that these vessels could make a more attractive military target.
China, for one, might regard an unmanned vessel as a less escalatory target to test out an anti-ship missile.
Sebens says that despite those concerns, driverless ships could be critical in responding to a Chinese blockade of Taiwan. Commander Daly says the unmanned surface vehicles should be fully integrated into the U.S. military in the next few years. Jessica Stone, VOA News, Washington.
An art exhibition has opened in Tripoli, hoping to inspire Libyans to establish environmental projects through sustainable designs. It is telling the story of designers, their journey towards environmental sustainability, while encouraging people to recycle and reuse some of the waste that would have otherwise been buried in landfills.
Spread over a space of 150 square meters, the 3 co-designed 3R Reduce, Recycle, Reuse exhibition made its way to Tripoli to showcase Italian-made recycled products and sustainable material and technologies.
The idea of the exhibition is to recycle and reuse some of the waste that would have otherwise been buried in landfills, and to inspire people on how to reuse and recycle these things, in addition to preserving the environment. It is excellent to witness the idea of the exhibition and seeing how items were reused.
The project was brought by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in collaboration with the Libyan Department of Antiquities and is now open to the public.
I advise youth to take advantage of this exhibition, to think of future recycling projects, to get rid of the garbage piling up everywhere. And I think it would be revolutionary in terms of finding a civilized solution for the garbage and to allow Libyans to create job opportunities.
The exhibition has traveled through the United States, Europe, and the Middle East.
A movie portraying an all-female warrior unit that centuries ago defended the West African nation of Dahomey, what is today the country of Benin, is drawing both praise and criticism. Viewers Penelope Pelou reports The Woman King has an all-black and mostly female cast, first for a major Hollywood motion picture, but some critics note it had little African involvement.
Rarely does Hollywood portray Africa or Africans except through the eyes of outsiders. Not so The Woman King. Led by General Naniska, the Agoji warriors, a fearsome women's unit, slay their enemies, European and African slave traders. Academy Award winner Viola Davis says she identifies with her warrior character.
I saw myself within the same way I see my white counterparts. And it wasn't until I went out into the world and the industry that I realized the world and the industry does not see me the same way.
Ready for war!
The Agoji story, many know about it, heard about it, but to see it on screen, it's a different experience.
Bukari Sawadogo, who teaches at City University in New York, notes there is both excitement and criticism surrounding the film.
This is African stories, but in terms of how he was represented and the movie was made, was little active African involvement in the movie, be it in front of the camera, but also behind the camera.
It took 7 years and upwards of $50 million to make The Woman King, which was shot in South Africa. Kathy Schulman, who helped produce the film, says it was an uphill battle getting Hollywood to finance it.
Black Panther opened a certain door, right? The Black Panther said, imagine an African nation with agency. And I said, well, why do we not have to imagine it? How about an actual African nation with agency? You know, each one of these things is a step.
Actors trained rigorously for the combat scenes, says Sheila Atim, who co-stars as Agoji warrior Amenza.
We were trying to portray these women who were some of the most extraordinary warriors the world has ever seen. We wanted to do it right.
Noting the Kingdom of Dahomey took part in selling other Africans into slavery, there have been calls to boycott the film. Yet, according to The Hollywood Reporter, the film's opening weekend in the U.S. exceeded expectations, grossing $19 million. Women made up 58% of all ticket buyers, according to post-strike exit polling. Black moviegoers made up 56% of the audience.
Train hard, fight harder. You know, it is a fact that women are the primary buyers of content. That's film, that's television, that's streaming. And so really what you're doing is asking to make a movie for the majority, not the minority.
Despite controversies, the film has generated excitement in Africa and among the African diaspora, says Sawadogo.
And they can really, identify with it even more. Even this morning I saw a post urging everybody to go see the movie because this movie is about us. So you have a pride there in the immigrant communities to go see this movie.
Viola Davis wants more films produced about empowered Black people, especially women, in Africa and America.
We've got to normalize it. Listen, we've been here just as long as everyone else since 1612 in a completely different capacity, but we are human too.
We are Dahomey! Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
Don't know, take my power, my power. Don't know, take my power, my power.
Well, and that's our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Channels Television has our last word.
We look forward to bringing you another show next week. ChannelsTV.com is your source for news and other programming. I am Chamberlain, so thank you for watching. Goodbye.